If you're a woman over 60, if you've ever poured your entire life into loving someone, only to feel invisible when your reflection starts to age, stay. Because what happened to me might sound like fiction, but I promise it's someone's truth. Maybe even yours. My name is Lorraine. I'm 67, and last winter, after 38 years of marriage, my husband looked me dead in the eye and told me he was leaving. Not for someone kinder, not for someone who could give him what I couldn't. No. For a woman younger than our daughter, he didn't whisper it. He didn't cry. He didn't even flinch. He smiled like he'd just earned a promotion. And I was just the old version he could finally trade in. I whispered, "I gave you my youth." He laughed. "You were never the reason I succeeded. Lorraine, I tolerated you. Tolerated me." Let me tell you what he called tolerating. I raised our children. I cared for his dying mother. I worked part-time and supported his dream when all he had was a shed and a sketch. I packed his lunches while he wined and dined clients in tight dresses. I gave. I stayed. I aged. And the second my hair turned silver, he walked away. But he didn't just leave. Evicted me. Our home. The house I helped pay for. The place I cooked. Cleaned. Cried in. Legally, it was all under his name. And just like that, I had nothing but a suitcase, a small pension, and a heart so heavy, I thought it might just stop to save me the rest. My son stopped answering my calls. My daughter said, "Dad says you've been unstable lately." Unstable. That's what they call it now when a woman finally breaks, after being broken for decades. So, at 67 years old, I moved into a motel, 3 changes of clothes, a bottle of dollar store shampoo, and grief so loud it echoed in silence. I wanted to scream into the night. Why didn't anyone tell me this is what happens when women age? That one day we'd just vanish, even to the people we gave everything for. But that's not where this ends. This is only the beginning. Chapter 1. Because somewhere between that cracked motel mirror and the first snow of winter, something happened. Something small. Something impossible. A chance. And I took it. They thought I was finished. They had no idea who they were walking away from. Before I tell you what came next, if you're still here, if you're listening quietly, maybe with a warm drink or curled up somewhere safe, would you let me know where you're watching from? How this story makes you feel so far here on Tenacity Tales. We share stories not just to remember, but to be remembered. Leave a comment. Let us hear your voice. And if your heart feels something stirring, maybe, just maybe hit that subscribe button, so you don't walk this road alone. And now, let's get back to my story. You'd think the first night alone in a motel after losing everything I'd cry. You'd think I'd scream into the pillow, punch the walls, or call someone and beg them to just listen. But there was no one left to call. And the grief, it was so sharp, so sudden, that it wrapped itself around my body like ice. Too cold to feel anything, too painful to touch. I didn't cry. I just sat, on the edge of the bed, hands resting in my lap like they no longer knew what to do. The cracked mirror across the room stared back at me, and for the first time in years, I really saw myself. Not through Stephen's eyes, not through my children's judgment, not through society's lens, but through my own. A 67-year-old woman, with thinning hair, faint age spots, lines carved deep by loyalty and loneliness. But it wasn't my face that undid me. It was my eyes. The way they looked hollow, like someone had turned the light off behind them. A kind of sadness no mascara can cover. An ache that doesn't cry because it's too old to believe anyone's still listening. I looked like I had stopped mattering. The moment I stopped being useful, I had spent 38 years making sure everyone else had somewhere to land. Now I had no place of my own. And the cruelest part, Stephen didn't just leave. He didn't just take the house, he cut me off completely. The joint accounts frozen. Credit cards canceled. He said, "Figure it out. You never earned it anyway." Never earned it. Imagine hearing that after building every spreadsheet, filing every tax return, saving every receipt from a business that used to run out of our garage. I applied for government support. The waiting list was months long. And every day felt like I was being punished for trusting a man I once called my future. But it got worse. 3 nights into my motel stay, the manager knocked on my door. "Ma'am," he said, "I hate to tell you this, but the room was only prepaid for 1 week. You'll need to check out by morning." Stephen had paid in advance. Not out of kindness, out of control. And just like that, even the fragile roof over my head was slipping away. That night, I walked the city for hours. No destination, no purpose, just clutching my coat as the wind tore through my bones. I thought about curling up at the bus station. I thought about disappearing completely. But just as I passed a boarded-up bookstore, I saw something strange, a piece of paper taped to the glass, corners curling in the cold. Caretaker wanted. Apartment included. Apply inside. I froze, my breath visible in the air. And then, for some reason, I can't explain, I pressed my hand to the glass. My reflection stared back at me, tired, broken, unwanted, but still standing. So I opened the door. That job, that apartment, it didn't just save me. It began something I didn't even realize I was still capable of. Hope. I didn't expect kindness to show up wearing nicotine-stained fingers and a limp in the left leg. But that's how Harold entered my story, a man who smelled like dust, ink, and the past, the owner of the bookstore, or what was left of it. When I stepped inside that night, the bell above the door didn't ring. It coughed like even it had grown tired of being forgotten. The shop smelled of old pages and broken promises. Shelves half empty. Light bulbs flickering like they too were unsure if they should keep going. Harold looked up from behind a mountain of papers, his eyes sharp despite the sagging lines around them. "You here for the caretaker thing?" he asked. As if I'd been expected. I didn't have a resume. Just trembling hands and a heart raw with humiliation. "I can clean," I whispered. "Organize. I'm good with old things." He studied me for a long moment. Not just my face, but the way my shoulders curled inward, like I'd learned to shrink to survive. Then he said something that made my breath catch. "You need this more than I need help." And just like that, he gave me the keys. No interview, no paperwork, just a set of keys and a gesture toward the narrow staircase in the back. The apartment was humble, creaky floors that sang with every step, wallpaper peeling like tired skin, a toilet that hissed every time it flushed. But it was mine. No one telling me I was too emotional. No one laughing when I stayed silent. No one asking why I hadn't moved on yet. That first night, I curled up on the old sofa wrapped in a second-hand quilt. And for the first time in weeks I slept. Not because I was comfortable, but because I was empty. Empty of the need to explain. Empty of the effort to be enough. Empty of him. And in the stillness of that night, I found something I didn't expect. Hope wasn't loud. It didn't knock. It didn't shine like a sunrise. Hope was quiet. It was the sound of my breath softening, the warmth of being alone without being lonely. And then, as if the bookstore itself knew I needed something more, it handed me a mystery. The next morning, in the kitchen drawer, a small stack of letters, yellowed, fragile, unopened, all addressed to someone named Beatrice. The morning after I moved in, I opened the kitchen drawer looking for a spoon. Instead, I found ghosts. A small stack of envelopes, yellowed with time, tucked beneath an old takeout menu and a broken pen, delicate, unopened. Each one addressed in the same careful handwriting to Beatrice. There was no return address, just pain folded neatly and sealed with years of silence. I sat down at the rickety table, the sunlight cutting through the cracked blinds, and I began to read. The first letter was short. Emin begging for forgiveness. He had left. He was sorry. He missed the way she made tea. The second was longer, colder. The apology had withered into indifference. By the third letter, he wasn't writing out of love. He was writing out of guilt. And that guilt still smelled like control. I read them all, one by one, like peeling off layers of skin I didn't know I shared with her. Somewhere around the sixth letter, I stopped reading as a stranger and started grieving like a sister. Because Beatrice wasn't just a woman abandoned. She was every woman the world forgets once her usefulness expires. She was silenced, then punished for going quiet. I asked Harold about her. He shrugged. Used to live upstairs. He said, went kind of mad after her husband ran off with the nurse. Never really came back from that. Disappeared. He meant, not physically, spiritually, a woman who gave everything, and then slowly faded out of her own life. That night, I sat on the floor of the bookstore apartment and wept for a woman I had never met because I didn't need to. Her heartbreak echoed my own. Her loneliness wore my face. Her silence sounded just like mine. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I didn't want to vanish like Beatrice. I didn't want to be another name whispered in past tense. So I reached for paper. I reached for a pen. And I wrote, not to Stephen, not to my children, but to women like me, women who had been told their grief was too much, that their age made them invisible, that they were no longer worthy of being heard. I wrote 5 lines. Simple, true, and taped them to the front door of the bookstore. If you've been forgotten, I see you. If you've been broken, you're not alone. We survive. We heal. We rise. Come talk to me upstairs. I didn't expect anyone to read it. But the next morning, someone knocked. I didn't hear the knock at first. I was still standing at the top of the stairs, half expecting the wind to tear my note off the door, or worse, for no one to ever see it. That little scrap of paper, written in shaky pen, taped to a bookstore window, no one looked through anymore. It felt like tossing a message into the sea. And yet the knock came. Soft, tentative, like someone testing whether they were welcome in the world again. I opened the door slowly. There, standing in the hallway, was a woman in a worn coat, her fingers clutching the note I had written like it was a lifeline. She looked at me not with judgment, not with pity, but with something deeper, recognition. I think I'm Beatrice's sister, she whispered. Her voice cracked like old floorboards. We sat at the tiny kitchen table, 2 strangers bound by silence, holding mugs that steamed but could not melt the walls we'd built around our pain. She told me her name was Nancy, that she hadn't heard from her sister in over 10 years, that Beatrice had written letters to everyone but no one ever wrote back. She just kept writing. Nancy said, like she was trying to stay visible, I understood. God, I understood. We don't scream when we're forgotten. We whisper. We write. We leave crumbs in hopes that someone will trace them back to us. Nancy told me that their family thought Beatrice had lost her mind. But what they called madness was grief no one helped her carry. They watched her fall. And instead of catching her, they turned away because it was easier. She started talking to herself. Nancy said, I think it was the only voice she had left. And I sat there, nodding, because I had spoken to my own reflection too, just to feel like someone was listening. Nancy left in tears. But before she walked out the door, she turned to me and said, You remind me of her, but stronger, louder, like who she might have become if someone had just stayed. That night, I stared at my note again. Those 5 lines scrawled in loneliness. They hadn't just reached Nancy. They had called out to every woman who had once sat in silence and wondered if her pain still mattered. And then something strange began to happen. The note kept disappearing. At first, I thought it was the wind, or teenagers tearing it down. But then another woman came. And then another. 3 more. All of them holding a folded paper. All of them saying the same thing I thought. I was the only one. It started with a knock. Then another. And then more. At first, I thought it was the same woman returning. But they were different. Each one holding the note I had written folded carefully, as if it were something fragile they'd carried in secret for too long. They didn't ask for directions. They didn't ask for permission. They came up the stairs. Ease unsure. Shoulders curled. Lips trembling. But they came. Women in their 60s. Their 70s. Even one in her 80s. Some wore lipstick like armor. Some wore shame like skin. But all of them walked through that bookstore as if crossing a threshold back into themselves. They told me things I will never forget. My husband left me for our neighbor. My son hasn't called in months. My daughter said I'm a burden. My savings were drained by someone I loved. I don't know who I am anymore. They whispered, as if too loud would break the spell of being heard. And I listened, not as a therapist, not as a savior, just as a woman who understood. I gave them tea, folded chairs, blank paper and pens, and in that dusty back room of a forgotten bookstore, we formed a circle. No rules, no structure, just stories. I started calling it the Whisper Circle because that's how it began. Not in shouts, not in declarations, but in the quiet things we tell only when we believe someone might actually care. We met once a week. They came back and brought others. A friend, a sister, a neighbor who hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Soon, the circle grew too big for the tiny heater to warm. But still no one stopped coming. I started finding letters under my door, folded napkins, lined paper, crayon scraps, anything they could write on. Confessions. My son forged my signature. My husband called me useless after I stopped working. My daughter says I'm too emotional. My ex took the house I paid for. I read every one, because they weren't just stories. They were echoes of women who had loved too hard, given too much, stayed too long. These weren't weak women. These were warriors in disguise. And just when I thought this quiet circle was the only miracle I would get, my phone rang. Stephen, for the first time in months. And I didn't tremble. Because while he had been busy spending my silence, I had found my voice. The first time he called, I didn't answer. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted him to sit with silence just like I had. To feel it fill a room. To hear it throb like a second heartbeat. To realize that silence isn't absence. It's weight. He left a message. Lorraine, I just need to talk. It's important. Important. That was the word he used after telling me I ruined his best years. After saying I was lucky, he didn't throw my suitcase onto the lawn. After painting me as unstable to the children I carried inside me for 9 months, now he needed to talk. I listened to the message once, then deleted it, and made myself tea, not out of coldness, but out of peace. There's a quiet pleasure in letting someone sit in the silence they once gave you. And while Stephen was pacing in panic, I was walking into the bookstore where 6 women were already waiting. Marjorie had just discovered her son forged her signature on a bank loan. Alice's husband told her to start preparing for a nursing home. Ruth was evicted from the house she built because it was in her son-in-law's name. These weren't headline stories. America doesn't want to read about older women being betrayed. But these women, They mattered. Their stories mattered. Because they were real. That week, our circle doubled. 12 women. 12 chairs. 12 stories that had been buried under years of silence and survival. I gave them paper. We called it the Ledger of the Forgotten. Each woman wrote her truth. Some had shaky hands. Some couldn't finish without crying. But they wrote, and we listened. Still, I couldn't ignore it, the pull of Stephen's calls. They kept coming. His voice on each voicemail grew more desperate. Lorraine, I think there's been a mistake with the business. We might be facing a lawsuit. And then, I need your signature to access the joint account. You're still listed. Please. Lorraine. Please. That's when I remembered. All those years. All that paperwork. The bank account we opened when his business was still running out of the garage, I never removed my name. It was still legally half mine. That account held over $2 million. And without my signature, he couldn't touch a dime. He thought I was gone. Forgotten. Erased. But in the fine print of his empire, I still existed. That night, I looked in the mirror and said, calmly, you left me with nothing. But I never stopped paying attention. Are you still here with me? If you are, thank you. Not just for watching, but for listening. Truly listening. Did any part of this story remind you of someone? A mother? A grandmother? Maybe yourself. If you feel comfortable, would you share where you're watching from? How this chapter made you feel? Here on Tenacity Tales. We don't tell stories to get attention. We tell them so no one has to feel alone in what they've been through. You can leave a comment, just a word. A whisper. And if you'd like to keep walking with me through the next chapters, feel free to subscribe. Not for the numbers, but so we don't lose each other when the next page turns. Because what comes next, it isn't just my story anymore. It's about how we rise together. The first time Stephen ever called me his rock, I believed him. I was 47. The business had just turned its first real profit. He came home that night with a bottle of cheap champagne, eyes bright, lips loose from celebration. He kissed my cheek and said, Lorraine, none of this would have happened without you. And I believed him because back then, love still sounded like gratitude. But what I didn't know was that he was already rehearsing the rewrite, because as the business grew, so did his ego. And slowly, the story changed. He became the visionary, the genius, the self-made man. I became the background, the sentimental credit in the footnotes, the one who never understood numbers, even though I was the one who built his spreadsheets, paid the invoices, filed the taxes, and answered every email with a polite version of his voice. And now, with the IRS at his door, with lawsuits stacking up, and with his empire trembling, he came crawling back to the same woman he discarded, because I held the one thing he couldn't fake access. That bank account he needed, still half in my name, because when I filed the paperwork 25 years ago, I didn't remove myself. Because back then, I didn't think I'd need to protect myself from the man I built everything with. But now I called the bank, requested full records, had them notarize a statement, confirming my 50% legal ownership. Then I made a second call to Camille, a woman from our whisper circle, a former lawyer who had found her voice again just months earlier. Are you ready to make him sweat? She asked. I smiled. The first real smile I'd felt in ages. We filed an injunction. We froze the account. We cited financial abuse. We cited abandonment. And suddenly my signature wasn't needed anymore. Because I wasn't just a passive name on the account. I was invoking breach of fiduciary duty. Big words. But they meant something simple. He built that business on my unpaid labor. And now, I was collecting. I didn't call him to tell him. Didn't explain. Didn't warn. I let him feel it. Let him wonder why transactions weren't going through. Let him sweat through the silence he once handed to me without blinking. And while he unraveled, while he scrambled to make calls, blame the bank. Panic in boardrooms, I walked into the back room of a dusty bookstore and poured tea for 12 women who had once believed their power had expired. Because that was the real empire now. Not his. Mine. I didn't answer his calls. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted him to feel something real. The waiting, the silence, the sense that you've been locked out of something you used to control. He called again. And again. Each message more frantic than the last. Lorraine. I don't understand what's happening. Can you please call me back? I need your help. Help. The same man who once told me I was lucky he didn't throw my suitcase onto the lawn was now begging for a lifeline. I didn't laugh. Not out loud. But somewhere inside me, a quiet heat rose in my chest. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was something softer. Stronger. Power returning. I poured myself some tea, carried it into the back room of the bookstore, and there they were, my women. 12 of them, each one gripping a sheet of paper, each one ready to read her truth aloud. Marjorie had just found out her son forged her signature to take out a loan. Alice had been told by her husband to start preparing for a nursing home. Ruth had been evicted from the house she built because it was in her son-in-law's name. And still they came here. Every week. With all their stories, all their scars, they didn't come for pity. They came for power. I called it the Ledger of the Forgotten, a circle of truth written on paper and spoken out loud by women who were told to stay quiet. And every week, that circle grew stronger. But Stephen's calls kept coming. More desperate. More urgent. Lorraine, I don't know what to do. I need your signature. We could lose everything. Please, just call me. Then came a different voice. My daughter. Mom, she said over the phone. Dad says you're blocking the account. We could lose the house. I asked a question I already knew the answer to. Did you know what he did to me? Silence. Then it's complicated. Mom. No. Sweetheart. I said softly. It's betrayal. And you watched it happen. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just hung up. And as I set the phone down, something settled in me. It wasn't bitterness. It was justice. And it was finally mine. That Tuesday, my daughter showed up early. No warning. No text. Just the soft knock on the bookstore door before the sun had fully risen. She looked different. Not like the girl who used to roll her eyes when I packed her lunch. But not quite the grown woman I had come to fear either. Her eyes were swollen, her hair unbrushed, and in her hands was a tray of store-bought pastries she clearly didn't know how to present. She didn't say anything at first, just followed me into the back room, put the tray down on the folding table, and helped me set up the chairs, quietly, like someone trying to walk back across a bridge she once burned. The other women noticed her. Of course they did. But in the whisper circle, we don't ask questions on day one. We make space, and we let truth arrive in its own time. When it was her turn to speak, she stood. Her voice shook, but her spine stayed straight. I believed my father, she said. I wanted to believe him because it was easier. She looked down at her hands. I told myself Mom was just overwhelmed, that she was exaggerating, that maybe she had lost it. There was a sharp inhale in the room. Not judgment. Recognition. Because we had all heard those words before. You're too sensitive. You're just being dramatic. You remember it wrong. And then she said something that broke every heart in the room. I thought growing up meant protecting the parent who stayed strong. I didn't realize. Sometimes it's the one who goes quiet that's holding up the whole world. Silence. Then knots. Then one woman reached for her hand. Then another. We didn't forgive her in that moment. Forgiveness takes time. But we saw her. And that's where it begins. That night, after the circle had ended, she helped me wash mugs in the little sink behind the bookstore. The steam fogged her glasses, but her eyes stayed on mine. "You were always the strongest person I knew," she whispered. "I just didn't see it until he tried to break you." I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I simply said, "Now you do." She kissed my cheek before leaving. A small thing, but for the first time in years it didn't feel like guilt. It felt like home. The letter came folded in half, slipped quietly under my apartment door. No envelope. No noche. At first, I thought it was just another message from the bookstore, or maybe a kind word from one of the women. But when I opened it and saw the red stamp at the top, my hands turned cold. Notice of public auction property foreclosure. 1149 Marlowe Lane, my house. Our house, the one where I raised our children, painted the porch every spring. Cooked Christmas dinners in the kitchen, I once called mine. The same house where Stephen told me I no longer belonged, where he told our children I was unstable, where he locked the doors behind me and said the silence would be easier. It was going up for auction. Just like that. I sat down slowly, the letter resting on my knees like a ghost. But the strange thing was, I didn't cry, not even a single tear, because this time, the loss didn't feel like death. It felt like closing a book I had already outgrown. A week later, I had an errand near the old neighborhood. I wasn't planning to stop, but something curiosity. Maybe closure made me slow the car as I passed the place where my life had once lived. The lawn was overgrown. The shutters hung crooked. The house looked tired, as if it, too, had finally let go. I didn't get out. Didn't need to. I just watched it from the safety of the driver's seat and whispered, "Goodbye." That evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. My son. His voice was quiet, measured. "Mom," he said. "I should have called sooner. I know you've heard about the house. About Dad." I said nothing. "He's staying with me and Lindsay now. We're just trying to figure things out." Still, I stayed silent. Then came the real reason for the call. "Is there any way you could help? Just a little. We're behind on the mortgage. And I don't think Dad can handle this alone." I didn't shout, didn't accuse. I just asked, "Why don't you ask the woman he left me for?" There was a pause. A long, heavy pause. Then, finally, "She's gone. Took what she wanted and disappeared." How poetic. I exhaled slow. Even. "I'm sorry, son," I said. "But I'm not in the business of rescuing people who destroyed me." And I hung up. Not out of cruelty, but because some chapters need to close completely before you can begin again. It started with a joke. A silly one. Really? Mary, our 72-year-old retired teacher with the raspy voice and endless lemon drops, was recounting how her ex-husband used to call her too emotional. And now he cried every time the stock market dipped. The room fell apart with laughter. Real laughter. Not the kind you fake to fill a silence. The kind that cracks open something inside you. Mine was the loudest. I laughed so hard, my cheeks hurt. So hard my chest shook. So hard my eyes welled, not from sadness this time, but from something lighter, something warmer. I hadn't laughed like that in years. Not since before the motel. Not since before I was told I was too old. Too unstable. Too invisible to matter. Back then, I used to laugh to cover the pain, to seem fine when everything inside me was unraveling. But this time I wasn't laughing to survive. I was laughing because I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. It hit me all at once how long grief had lived inside my body, how it had settled into my bones, tightened my shoulders, dulled the sound of joy until I forgot what it even sounded like. But there, in that dusty back room with mismatched chairs and chipped mugs, I laughed like someone who remembered what it meant to feel alive. And it didn't stop there. That same week, we started hosting workshops, real ones. How to open a checking account, how to write a will, how to recognize emotional manipulation in your own home. Women showed up with notebooks, with questions, with urgency. Sponsors noticed. A local nonprofit offered grants. Volunteers arrived, one after another. And just like that, the Whisper Circle grew into something new. The Second Chapter Foundation. No longer just a room to cry in, now a space to rebuild from. The news caught wind of it again. A national podcast reached out. They wanted to hear from me. From us. They called it the Uprising of the Forgotten Women. And for the first time, I didn't flinch at the word forgotten. Because now, we weren't forgotten. We were found by each other. She walked in just as the group was winding down. Long coat, green hat pulled low, face unfamiliar, but her posture tight. Protective felt all too familiar. She didn't speak, just sat in the back, hands clenched on her lap, eyes scanning the floor like it might offer an escape. After everyone left, she lingered, running her fingers across the spines of old books like they might speak first. I approached slowly. No pressure, just presence. First time I asked softly. She nodded. Then, with a voice that barely touched the air, she whispered, "I wasn't sure I deserved to be here." That stopped me. Not because I hadn't heard it before, but because I had felt it. "How come?" I asked. She hesitated, then dropped her gaze. "Because I stayed. After what he did, I stayed too long. And now I feel ashamed." That word, ashamed, it clings to women like fog. Especially when the world tells you should be grateful just to exist past a certain age. That survival isn't enough unless it's silent. I pulled out a folding chair, sat beside her. "You're here," I said. "That's all that matters." Her name was Norma, 68. Her husband had controlled every dollar, every decision, every conversation for 4 decades. When he got sick, her children moved in not to help her, but to manage his pension and estate. And just like that, she became invisible inside her own home. I had to ask permission to buy my own shoes, she said quietly, then added, "And now, they say, I'm overreacting." I wanted to scream, but instead, I held her hand. Not to save her, just to say, "I see you." I gave her a copy of our Ledger of the Forgotten, the same journal many of us had written in, the one filled with truths too long buried. Her hands trembled as she accepted it. "Your story belongs in here," I said, "only if you want it to." She looked up, eyes brimming with tears. "Do you really think I can still start over?" she asked. I smiled. "Norma, you're not starting over. You're starting, finally." And I saw it. That flicker, that fragile flame beneath years of wet ash. The next week, she wrote her story. The week after, she read it aloud, and every woman in the room stood to hug her. Because that's what we do now. We raise each other. His name hadn't crossed my mind in weeks. Not once. It was as if my memory had finally allowed me to rest. Until the letter came, folded neatly. No return address. Just my name. Written in handwriting I knew better than my own. I held it for a long time. The paper felt heavier than it looked. Like it carried all the weight he had refused to hold when he walked away. I opened it. Inside just 10 words. "No, dear Lorraine. No love. No explanation. Just this, if you can find it in your heart, forgive me. That was all. No acknowledgement of the motel. The lies. The silence. No mention of the years he erased me. Just a plea. Written like a debt he hoped I'd forget to collect. I later learned from my son that Stephen had suffered a stroke. Couldn't walk. Could barely speak. Living in a nursing home with chipped walls and plastic sheets. The woman he left me for gone. The business gone. The children who once defended him, now facing the truth piece by piece. And now, this man, who once said I was the reason for his failure, had only one voice left to write with, and he used it to ask for forgiveness like it was spare change. I folded the letter again, slipped it into the back of a drawer, not out of love, not even out of anger, just because I didn't need to burn it to prove I was free. I didn't reply. Some people ask me if that was cruel. Maybe. But let me tell you what's cruel. Throwing a 67-year-old woman into a motel with nothing but a suitcase and her wedding ring. Cutting off her access to money she helped earn. Telling their children she's mentally unstable, just so they won't look back. That's cruelty. Not silence. At our next whisper circle, I shared the letter. Not to gloat. Not to weep. But because Norma had just gotten a message from her son asking for a small loan, and Ruth's ex-husband had asked her to co-sign on a business venture. It's always the same, isn't it? When we have nothing, they leave us. When they have nothing, they remember we exist. But here's what's changed now. We don't forget who we are anymore. It came in a crisp envelope, delivered by courier. Legal-looking. Professional. Sterile? The sender's name on the corner made my stomach tighten. Not Stephen. His lawyer. For a second, I thought, maybe it's something final. Closure. But no, it was a proposal. Not for love, for business. They wanted me to sign off on unfreezing the joint business account. Just temporarily. In exchange, they would grant me a partial ownership title. Silent partner. An honorary seat at the table I was once thrown out of. It was laughable. A man who told me I was nothing, now trying to make me something because he had nothing left. It wasn't a gesture of kindness. It was a survival strategy. I read the letter again. Not to consider it, but to let it all sink in, because here's what he still didn't know. I didn't want his business. I didn't want a chair at his table. I didn't want his scraps. His titles. Or his guilt dressed up in legal language. I had built something better. Something real. Something that didn't require my silence or my erasure. I didn't want to be a silent partner in a dying empire. I wanted to be the loud founder of a future where women like me were never discarded again. So I returned the envelope, untouched. But I did include a note. 5 words. Handwritten. Simple. I don't need your empire. That week, we celebrated our 100th woman helped through the Second Chapter Foundation. Housing. Legal support. Freedom. We baked pies. Hung twinkle lights. Told stories under the soft hum of music from a dusty radio in the back room. And as I looked around at these beautiful, weathered, unbreakable women laughing and dancing and healing, I realized something powerful. I wasn't happy because he was failing. I was happy because I wasn't. It was just after 10 a.m. The bookstore had barely opened. The bell on the door chimed soft and familiar. She walked in with heels that clicked like confidence. Clipboard in hand. A woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a softer smile. "I'm Rachel," she said. "I'm with a documentary team. We're doing a series on untold stories of resilience. Women over 60. Then she pointed to the faded newspaper clipping behind the counter. "I read this. And I think your story is one people need to hear." I almost laughed. My story for so long. No one wanted to hear it. Not Stephen. Not my children. Not even me. On most days, But I nodded. 2 weeks later, she returned with a crew. Lights, cameras, muffled steps and polite voices. She asked me if I'd sit down for an on-camera interview. I hesitated. I'm not trying to be famous, I said. She smiled. Gently. You won't be famous, but you will be seen. And that's what matters. They set up in the back room, the same room where we'd cried, confessed, and healed. Behind me were taped letters from the Whisper Circle, pages written by hands that had once trembled, now steady. She asked me to speak to just one woman. One woman, sitting alone in her kitchen, wondering if her life was already over just because someone told her she didn't matter anymore. And I did. I spoke not with drama, not with bitterness, but with truth. I spoke of that motel mirror, of eating saltines for dinner, of crying so hard I forgot my own name. I spoke of how the cruelest thing Stephen ever did was not leaving me but making me feel worthless long before he did. Then I told them about this place, this circle, this rebellion in a bookstore, how we found each other in the dark and created light. After the cameras were packed away, Rachel hugged me, whispered, "You just gave someone out there permission to take her life back." That night, I couldn't sleep, but I wasn't restless. I was alive. Near midnight, the phone rang. It was Erica. "Mom," she whispered. "I just saw your interview on their teaser page. I didn't even know it was live yet. You were breathtaking." She sniffled. "I sent it to my friends. They're all crying." Then she paused. "I'm proud of you. Not because you survived, but because you built something beautiful out of the mess we left you in." I cried too, quietly, not from pain, but from finally being seen. It was a simple message. No fancy greeting. No capital letters. Just emotion pouring through the keys. "My name is Elena. I'm 70 Court. I just watched your story. I haven't left my house in 6 months. You gave me hope. Please don't stop telling the truth." I stared at her message for a long time. It wasn't long, but it landed like a whisper against the back of my neck. I imagined Elena sitting somewhere across the country in slippers she used to wear out into the world, now worn thin from pacing her hallway. Maybe she was holding an old tablet, watching my story with hands that had forgotten what being held felt like. Maybe she paused the video halfway through to cry. Or maybe to breathe again. I replied right away, not with anything fancy. "Just the truth, you're not alone anymore. You never were. Come join us. We'll wait for you." The next day, she wrote back. Elena was from Oregon. She was widowed. Her 2 sons stopped calling after she refused to sell the family home. She hadn't had a visitor in months. She said some days she forgot what her own voice sounded like. So I sent her a package. Inside a Whisper Circle journal, a handwritten list of our writing prompts, a personal letter, and a bookmark that read, "Your second chapter starts the moment you decide you're worth more than their silence." She called a week later. We talked for 2 hours. She laughed. She cried. She asked me if we were real, if this place, this movement was something she dreamt up just to feel a little less forgotten. I told her no. We're real. And women like us, we're everywhere. Just waiting for someone to call us by our names again. A month later, Elena started her own Whisper Circle. In the basement of a small-town library in Salem, 5 women showed up the first week, 14 the next. And just like that, our quiet rebellion spread beyond these bookstore walls. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. And the best part, it was being written by women who were never supposed to speak again. It started with an email from the mayor's office. At first, I thought it was spam, or maybe some mix-up an invitation meant for someone else. But it wasn't. They had read the article, seen the interview, heard about the Second Chapter Foundation, and they wanted to recognize it. Not me, us. The women. The circle. The stories. The survival. There was going to be a civic ceremony. A local awards night to honor quiet heroes. People who turned pain into purpose. They wanted us to speak. I almost said no. Not because I wasn't proud, but because that old voice inside me still whispered, "You're not special. You're just the background. The extra. The afterthought." But then I remembered Norma, and Elena, and Ruth, and Erica, and every woman who walked into our bookstore with eyes full of loss and left with fire behind them. So I said yes. That night, we wore white. Not to stand out, but because it felt like shedding ash. Like starting clean. I stood on stage. 5 women behind me, the founding circle. And when I spoke, I didn't read a script. I spoke from the place inside me that used to be silent. I was left in a motel at 67 with no home, no money, and no voice. Everyone told me I should start over. But they don't tell you that at our age, there's no such thing as starting over. There is only choosing not to disappear. The room was silent. No coughing, no shifting, just breath being held. Then the applause, louder than anything I'd ever heard. Reporters came. People cried. Women hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for saying the thing I never could." But the most unexpected moment was when one woman approached me quietly. She was young, dressed in scrubs. "I care for him at the home," she said. It took me a second. "Him, Stephen. He watches your video. On repeat, says nothing, just stares, like he's trying to remember how to speak again." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because that night, under stage lights, with a medal around my neck and 5 women behind me who once felt voiceless, I realized he was watching me now. But I was the one holding the microphone. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. One of those soft gray days where the sky looks like an old sweater and everything feels a little slower. I was sipping my coffee black. No sugar. Now when the phone rang, the number on the screen made me pause. The bank? Our bank? The one Stephen and I used for the business. The one I'd frozen months ago. I picked up. A woman's voice. Gentle. Professional. "Mrs. Hale. Just calling to confirm your recent directive. You've requested the full closure of the joint business account, with the remaining balance to be transferred under the second chapter foundation." "Correct." I stared at the window. The trees outside. Motionless. Everything around me went still. "Yes," I said. That was it. No ceremony. No final confrontation. Just a voice on the phone. A click on a screen, and the last legal string between me and the man who once called me his rock was cut. My name, once buried under his brow, was now finally standing alone. My choices, my records, my finances, my life, not managed by his assistant, not dictated by his moods, not twisted in legal knots, just mine. I stood up, walked to the mirror in the bookstore's bathroom, and stared at the woman staring back. 68 years old. Once discarded. Now, in command. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just breathed. Deep. Free. That afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found an envelope. No return address. Just a name handwritten in elegant cursive. Inside, a check. A large donation, anonymous. But the note, that's what made me sit down. 5 words. "You were never the problem. You were the foundation." No signature. No explanation. I don't know if it came from Stephen, or one of the children, or someone who'd seen the interview, but honestly, it didn't matter. Because it wasn't news to me. I was the foundation. And now, I was building something far stronger than any house he ever owned. That same day, a woman about 30 waited outside the bookstore. Nervous, eyes red. "My mom just passed," she said. She used to talk about this place all the time. I just wanted to see what she loved so much. I didn't ask her name, didn't ask for a story. I just opened the door and said, "You're welcome here. Always." I used to think I'd disappear quietly. That one day, I'd be just another woman in a chair by the window. Remembered only in past tense. She was kind. She was tired. She used to be someone. But I was wrong. Because today my life didn't end with silence. It ended with legacy. And the most beautiful kind one that keeps others alive too. We were at the National Women's Summit. A big white banner hung above the stage, the Second Chapter Foundation, a celebration of survival. 300 women. They came from everywhere. By plane, by bus, by borrowed car or broken faith. Women who had been betrayed, discarded, silenced. They came not just to be seen, but to see one another. And me, I stood on that stage. Not as the woman thrown into a motel at 67, but as the woman who led at 68. I held the microphone in hands that once trembled while signing divorce papers. And I said, everyone told me to start over. But no one tells you that at our age, you don't start over, you just decide not to disappear. The room went still, breath held, and then a standing ovation. Not for fame, not for pity, but for every woman who once whispered, "Maybe I still matter." Erica was there too. Front row, phone in hand, eyes full. Not because she felt guilty, but because she was proud. She now runs our outreach program for daughters and mothers. She told me every daughter should learn what I didn't, that love isn't just about honoring the past, it's about protecting the present. After I stepped down, women hugged me. Some cried. Some just held my hand and whispered, "Thank you. I didn't think it was possible. But one moment will never leave me." A tiny woman, white-haired, in her tachtigs, slipped a folded note into my palm. Then she smiled and said, "I thought it was too late. You showed me it never is." I opened it that night. 7 words, handwritten in soft blue ink. "You gave me a second life. I'm going to use it. And so will I. Because I was never meant to fade. And neither are you. If this story made you feel seen even just a little, please tell me where you're listening from. What did it awaken in you here on Tenacity Tales? We don't just tell stories. We hold space for truth, for healing, for women who were never meant to fade. If you'd like to keep walking with me, you can subscribe, not for numbers, but so we don't lose each other in the pages to come. Because somewhere out there, someone is still silent, and maybe your voice will be the one that finally reaches her.